On a show of hands, you got a restaurant company. You guys have not switched to a service charge model. You're queasy about it. You've been waiting, and you're here and you're thinking about it. Wow, awesome. So then, let's cut right to some good questions that'll help them the most. Give them some advice. You guys. The one common theme that I heard from both of you was the amount of time that you spent with your people. And, Michael, I know you made a comment to me that you guys were really, really inclusive with that server group, with the whole group. The other thing that I've heard you say is that the back of the house still isn't getting maybe the piece of the pie out of this whole thing that they intended. So managing expectations was also a theme where maybe you're starting to hear from the back of the house more because they're hearing from somebody else. I heard that. So there's a couple of topics there. Why don't you start with either one of those?
Yeah, I think that, here we are a year and 3 months in, well, a year and 6 months in for us to this exercise. And, just a few things as I Monday morning quarterback this process. The first piece is our employees are smart. And I think the sooner you engage in this exercise, if you're thinking about going down the road, the better. Because when we sat down with our server team, they said to me, I sat down with them, and they said to me, we knew this was coming. They know what sustainability looks like, and they were thrilled that we were engaging with them in a conversation 3 months before we were going to do anything related to their income. They were thrilled that they had a seat at the table from day number one. I was just at the HR and Hospitality Conference in Las Vegas last week, and I sat in a session presented by the head of HR for Union Square Restaurant Group, whatever their actual title is, which is the whole model, Danny Meyer model of hospitality included. And if you listen to some of the decision making that happened early on with them, it was very much from a top-down approach, not inclusive of the line staff. And you saw a lot, if anybody's paid attention to the media coming out of New York. It's been a very, very rough road for Union Square, and they're now just starting to turn the corner on that. Now, if I had some advice for you, we were so concerned about the reaction of our servers that we went with a very server-centric model of service charge distribution. So the servers, of course, being part of this conversation, this has worked very much to their advantage. And now we're looking at the income distribution, and we are saying, okay, well, we need to look at some adjustments to that distribution. Well, the Lord giveth away, or the Lord giveth the Lord when that's all good, when the Lord taketh away, not so good. So to Eric's point, as we look at the heart of the house, they are getting something they've never gotten before. But of course, they want a bigger piece of the pie. And the interesting thing is that as I sat with our culinary team a few weeks ago, they said, well, one of the comments I got was, well, you might as well not even give us anything. I was like, okay, you want us to take that, what we are providing you in your paycheck, out? Well, no, we don't want you to do that. I said, okay, we just want more. Okay, well, one of the things I had to remind them of is that there was nothing a year and a half ago. There was nothing that was added to their paycheck. One of the things that we've done is we don't want to do, as it relates to the heart of the house team, people that are not in a traditional tip position, we are not using the portion of their service charge distribution to determine pay rate whatsoever. We continue to pay them what the prevailing, or a competitive prevailing wage for their level of cook position. And the service charge portion is simply gravy on top of that, because we want to be able to go to them and say, listen, we want to make sure that we are recognizing the contribution that you make to the service experience or to the product experience really for the guest. So, I agree with them. They deserve more, but it is a very fine balance between, how do we now make those adjustments without really upsetting the servers, because they're ultimately the ones that are going to have to move that needle. And then how do we also make sure that people remember when they decided to become a cook, it was a personal choice. It's also their personal choice. Since the beginning of the whole tipping model, way back in history, there's always been income inequality between the front and the back of the house. And so that's nothing new. While we're trying to make that less, it will continue to exist because that's the way the model works. And so I think that there needs to be some realistic, very clear conversations with the heart of the house that this is never going to get to be a 50-50 proposition where everybody's on equal footing. We are here to try to help lessen that gap. Does that make sense? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
We actually have pretty much a very similar path. I actually tell my cooks that same thing. If you want to make more money, then you do need to make that choice. If you want to go to the front of the house, then we'll put in the work and the time and effort to train you to move to the front of the house. We're trying to change that balance, but it is never going to be 50-50 in that regard. But I think, bumping it up as much as we can within our model, and going to Marney's point, I think really it all does start with the model. We went through probably 100 different models. Our accounting team hates us, But when you are playing with people's incomes, it's really critical to find that model where everybody can still exist moving forward. So much as Michael said, we ended up going with a model that was probably more service focused and oriented. So at the end of it, after a year, we found that 73% were making as much or more than they were prior, which is probably why they're great with this system. But I think, backfilling, how do you get to that back of the house? It's still a quandary, and it's a conversation that we have also, but there's no answer for it at this point. Everything that comes in has really just been going to the front of the house. We don't take anything out for the back of the house. That came up early on, that the front of the house didn't want to pay for the back of the house. As a group, there were certainly smaller people or minorities of people that did want or were willing to make that commitment to the back of the house. But as a group, it was stated that we want what's coming to us to come to us.
You did your service model, and it's commission-based, and so the servers are, the assumption is the servers are getting paid based on gross sales that they pull in, right?
Yes. Yeah. So if you're a hungry server and you take more tables or you stay later, whatever it is, you have that opportunity. So it was important. Some pool houses don't work that way. It's a little bit different. So there's not as much of a piece to staying and taking an extra table. It's going to the pool and distributed versus going to yourself directly. Stop using the word tip. It's really confusing to the customer and to your internal staff. So we've really taken that word out of our dialogue because it becomes confusing.
So for the service charge, if 25% is going away from the waiters to the kitchen and the busters and stuff, is that?
We don't send any back to the kitchen. The 6% of the 20% goes to revenue share. So bar backs, busters, hosts, etc. That's how they're funded.
My name is John. I've been in the catering and restaurant business for 40 years. In all the 40 years that I've been in business, I've never understood why there is such a inadequate pay for the back of the house. Tip pooling, in our business, I know that you guys are going away from tips, and I understand that, but people still want a tip in the catering industry. I mean, I don't know what you guys are doing in the restaurant business.
You want to respond to that?
I think the Ninth Circuit ruling on tip pools is probably going to work against that. Yeah. If it's not an employee that's customarily tipped, which a cook is not, then hypothetically you're not supposed to fund them out of a tip pool. So most of the rulings are going against that, and that's one of the reasons why we kind of went to a service charge now, because service charge can be moved around. Anything paid to the house can be manipulated that way, but a tip cannot be in that way. So I think the service charge rules allow you to move money to the back, whereas tip pooling, you can. It's in the gray zone right now, but most of the legislation or law is tending the other way.
You have to understand the way I think that certainly the Ninth Circuit, and again, you don't want to get into the politics of all of this, but certainly the scenario that we live in here in the Ninth Circuit, as well as with the NLRB for the last 8 years, has been very much focused and certainly has been very much coached to focus on the person that is directly providing the service. And that's where the money should go. That's where the cash should go. Their viewpoint is it's a nebulous world. Now, we all know that it goes directly, there's a triangulation. There's the server, well, there's more than a triangulation, but there's the server team in the front that then, brings the dishes back and the stewards wash them and then they go to the kitchen where they get plated up. So it's a very clear, in our minds, very clear path in terms of being able to draw the lines of direct service. But in the world of the politics that we live in, that's a nebulous world where that money can go to if you're not giving it directly to the server. And in our view, in understanding that, this is the way for us. And again, I want to make it very clear, we decided at our own cost as an organization, when we say service charge, even though that goes to the house, 100% of those dollars go back to the hourly employees. We do not keep anything for benefits. We don't keep anything for base wages. 100% goes back to the employees. This is the way that we are able to, within the bounds of the law, start to shift that dynamic. It's never going to be perfect, but it's the way that we can start.
And we're in
We have
the
another
same
question
exact
back here.
ballpark.
Yes.
Yeah, my question, which I think you kind of maybe just answered, and Eric, you might have just answered right at the end there, but it's about the allocation of the service charge. So maybe I'll start with Eric, and I think you actually just answered it. But when you collect the service charge and it all goes back to the employees, is it all going back to the employees in quote unquote straight cash, or is some of it going back in cash, but the other is going back in the form of 401k and health benefits and employee discounts on food and parties and morale parties?
We intended for it to offset some benefits, but we never got there. So at this point, it's just going back for wage and commission. There's no backfill on benefits or parties or anything like that. So the hope was, but it's not there.
And I think you see the controversy. There's a lot of controversy that comes in that. I think Union Square does that, right? They say, okay, well, we pay everybody a specific hourly rate. Again, as you're trying to educate the public in what you're doing, they're very concerned that this 20% that otherwise would have been a tip that they thought was going to the employee, that you're not doing something to manipulate that money. And I think from our perspective, we already had to pay those things to begin with, 401k, whatever our contribution is to 401k and other benefits. Why are we going to now if we take some of that money for that purpose, then really in the end, we're the ones that somehow benefit from that. And I think that anybody that's done that, it usually gets some not so good publicity for doing so. So I'd be very
We have
reticent.
another question.
One
If I
quick thing to say though, this affected your bottom line, right? You
Yeah.
lost money, and so the employees they don't really, obviously don't care that you're losing more money, but.
They care. They care. I mean, it's maybe not first on their priority list, but
This was, do the employees care if you're losing money or making money?
yeah, because if we're not making money, they're not going to have a job at some point. So I think as a group, everybody recognizes that and is trying to pitch in. We're not going out of business, so it's not that critical. But it was a huge chunk, and I think we've been funding the back of the house, not the answer is, if it's not in the service charge, where does it come from? It just comes from the house, at that point.
Well, and to that point, initially it's a hit, but this is design. You're looking at a long-term strategy. So it's allowed us, if we want to look at, quote, base rate, it's allowed us to maintain our base rate at the state minimum, which is $11 an hour as of January 1st, for our server team. Yet they're making more money, to your point, than they did before under that process. So, but $11 an hour was 2 years ago. And so now it's 15. We've got a real situation where certainly in our business, in a hotel, you're not just looking at, we don't just have cooks and stewards in the kitchen. We've got room attendants that, we're making more than $15 an hour, but their income growth has gone like this, while people that live off of tips and gratuities, their income growth has been spiking like that. So we've got to be able to point, and perfect example, there still remains in people's minds, there still is a lot of misinformation out there. I had a cook upset in this meeting a couple of weeks ago saying the people in front are making $15 an hour plus service charge. And I had to say, hold on a second, hold on. That is misinformation. You need to understand what the truth is. And so I think that continual education is important, and you need to be looking at what's best long-term for your organization. So yes, certainly a significant cost impact early on, but we didn't make this decision to address something for a 1-year period. We made this decision to look at how can we control this process the best possible moving forward for the long term, because it's not going to stop at 15. We're going to keep going with cost of living index increases as we move forward, and we're obviously seeing it at the state level as well.
Thank you. We have a question that's been waiting a long time back there.
Hi, how are you communicating upfront to your guest about the automatic service charge? And then what has been your experience with guest feedback?
We do it a variety of ways. It depends house to house. Some houses, the waiters wanted control, so they do it. Some, the hosts do it. Some, the managers do it. But I think the most important piece is that it is being done every time and prior to getting the check. So just drop at the check. That is the least effective, and really, I think, you're gonna get a lot of complaints. Really now, at this point, it just mimics what it always did. If we had 2% complaints before, we had 2% now. It really hasn't changed that at all. If you're getting bad service before we had service charge, we would refund the whole check anyway. So we're doing it's exactly the same.
Service charge in Washington State has some very specific rules and regulations in terms of how you communicate that. So we have it on our website. It's on the menu. There's a spiel on the guest check. It is a standard for the server to talk about service charge with the guest. There's a very standard script that they have to follow. Communicate. If we have an issue and somebody disputes the service charge, we do not reverse the service charge. We reverse an equivalent amount off the guest check, because again, we do not want to be touching employee income. And we certainly have had complaints. People, don't like the control being taken from them. But to Eric's point, a small minority. And I think as people become especially well-traveled, as they become used to the service charge concept in other environments, other locations, New York, et cetera, it's becoming more commonplace. One model that I like a lot that I would suggest to here, not to talk about a competitor, but we're partnered with him. Anybody go to ESR restaurants, Ethan Stoll? They drop a card, a note on the table right when you arrive, and they point it out that explains in very, very clear words exactly how the service charge works. And we've opted not to do that in Goldfinch Tavern. Personally, I love it because it's right there. The second you sit down, there's no question, there's no surprises.
We did start with that, but I think we found that our waiters felt like they didn't have to say anything. So we took it off so that they did. But I would agree. I love what Ethan's doing with his little table tent thing. It's really nice. Clear.
Marty, did you have something you want to say?
They didn't give me a mic, so I don't think they want me to talk. I do just have a couple of things to add, sort of to everyone's point. One thing I just want to wind back and talk about front of the house and back of the house, and I think it's a real issue. I think that, when you talk about how server wages have gone up or server income has gone up if you compare that to how back of the house income has gone up, it's exponential, because every time you raise your prices, your server's making more money. It's a huge impact, huge disparity in income. And I will also say that the choice to move to the front of the house because you're not happy with your income, I do not necessarily think that is always a best fit. So for example, really close to home example, I have a 24-year-old son who is currently working at one of our larger restaurant groups here in Seattle, not at this table, and he is in the back of the house as a cook. Really liked it. He did that for about 3 years. Very passionate about cooking, and has decided to move to the front of the house. He is the only employee that has successfully made that transition from the kitchen, and as long as they can remember having happened. So what I'm saying is this is a different set of skills. It's a different skill set. It's a different type of personality. And he's coming home every night going, geez, Mom, I cannot believe what you have to deal with when you're dealing with people. This is a completely different skill set, and he has a lot of appreciation for it. So yes, people go to culinary school and they learn that, but these are skills that are professional skills as well.
Along those lines, I want to slip in one final one for me. It's kind of the dirty secret here. I mean, it's kind of, you guys both alluded to it, but dealing with the disparity, and the very first out of the blocks, everybody was concerned with rolling it out to their servers because they didn't want to lose their best servers.
Yeah.
You lose your best servers, you lose your customers. That's a big deal. So I saw it be very server-centric, and now you're saying, now we're starting to hire people on a different commission percentage. Mm-hmm. And it kind of reminds me of the cleanup at Virginia Mason. I mean, where you've got this institutional expectation for high earnings, and then how do you attack it over time? And I'm seeing a wave now of where some of these servers will have to change their expectations or they will move on. And
that, I think we have also started job performance reviews for waiters. Prior, there wasn't really that. Your raise was working harder, taking more tables, and it was more in the moment coaching or training. But now we have actual performance reviews, so you can move up in commission or in base pay. Based on that, with our expectations. But the part about it that we really enjoy now is that we get to manage the service. It's not just, a contractor in your restaurant, but somebody who's asking us, how do I earn more? Well, attitude, skills, technique, whatever it is. Now it's on the field as something that we can talk about and to make more money.
And to Eric's point, that is within your organization. I believe it's really about aligning everybody's incentives, and it's really about incentives within the organization. When you start talking about the guests, it's really about perception, and so that's where the messaging is ultimately important. If you have to take a long time to explain it, it's probably not coming across well. And you have to always remember that your guest, they're tippers, and people are tippers because we've been trained to do that. You tip, somebody serves you, you tip them. It's your choice to do it, even though you might feel some coercion there. It is actually your choice to do so, and the tip that you give, you intend to go to the server. And so that's why I think that both Eric and Michael are doing a great job being very sensitive to that from a guest perspective, and saying this is really the intent of the guest, and you really have to be careful of that.
We have one minute left.
Okay, quick question. You guys have upscale places with people with good disposable income, perhaps. I have a more humble restaurant. It's a barbecue restaurant.
We have tons of quick service.
Do you think that people in the kind of place like mine would appreciate the 20% thing as much as your clients?
It's interesting. We have a tavern, Brave Horse Tavern, down in South Lake Union. We transitioned them the last because we were concerned a service charge in a tavern would not go over well. That is a place where we had the least complaints. Nobody's said anything.
Your guys work at Amazon. My guys drive trucks. So
You serve,
I
you
think your
serve
food's more
tremendous
expensive
barbecue,
than our
though.
food. But I think that's really house to house. I think that you have to know your customers. So that assessment piece, assessing who your customers are, is the first thing. I don't think there's one solution that's going to work for every restaurant.
I hate to say this, but we're out of time, and we still have more questions. So let me encourage you, please, to see the panel members after. We've got 5 minutes. So here's what's. Thank you. By the way, please thank the panel here. Great job, guys. Thank you very much.